You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and there is a huge NFL story to talk about. No, it is not Colin Kaepernick signing with the Jets, hashtag fake news. Before I get into the Cooks trade, I just want to tell you, I was hanging out with my friend Jim yesterday, and I get a text from my other friend Mark, and he sends me an article that says New York Jets signed Colin Kaepernick. Immediately, my heart just sinks. I mean, I don't like Colin Kaepernick. I don't respect Colin Kaepernick. I hate what he did with the national anthem. Now's not the time and place for that, but I just wanted to get that out there. So immediately, I just stop what I'm doing with Jim, and I say, hold on, just got a text, have to read this story. Well, what's the story? I don't want to tell you until I can see whether it's real or not. So, I clicked the headline, and it didn't take me long to figure out that it was a fake SportsCenter account. I don't know whether Mark was trolling me or not. I mean, it did make the rounds. Kaepernick was trending on Twitter yesterday, or maybe it was the Jets that was trending. That story actually got some traction. But it was clearly fake. All you had to do was just click the story. Like I said, I don't know if Mark was trolling me or not, but he almost gave me a heart attack yesterday. So, it's all good. Promise, Mark, I'm not mad at you. You gave me a good scare. Okay. On to the Brandon Cooks trade. And am I the only one who actually doesn't mind this trade for the Texans? Look, is Brandon Cooks better than DeAndre Hopkins? Absolutely not. DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best wide receivers in the league. Brandon Cooks is up there, but he's not at Hopkins' level. If Hopkins is top 3 or top 5, Cooks is top 10. Maybe top 15. There are a lot of people that are going to hold last year against him. Was terrible last year with the Rams. Had a concussion, which has scared a lot of people. I don't understand why. There are people saying he has concussion issues. He does not have concussion issues. That is not true. Brandon Cooks has played all 16 games in each of his NFL seasons. He's been in the league for 6 years, except for last year and his rookie year, 2014. Last year was a concussion. No question. The year before that, 2014, he missed 6 games, not because of a concussion. He broke his thumb. That's not a concussion. What, we're going to call one concussion now a huge issue? That's it? The guy's going to be out of the league soon? Alright, fine. Then the Buccaneers shouldn't have signed Tom Brady. Tom Brady said on the Howard Stern show that he's had concussions. By the way, I've listened to about half that interview. It's a long interview, over 2 hours, but it's worth listening to. Stern did a great job with Brady. I know that Stern isn't a big sports fan, but I just thought he did a great job with Brady. He did get to the heart of the issues. The thing with Stern is he's just so great at getting these personal details out of his interviewees. Best interviewer in the history of media. No question. But back to Cooks. If we're going to call one concussion an issue so great that he's not worth trading for, there are a lot of players in this league that you don't want on your team. And, say what you want about the Hopkins trade, but O'Brien realized that he needed a dynamic wide receiver to pair with Watson. Brandon Cooks is a dynamic wide receiver. He's not as good as Hopkins, but he's not that much worse. They are in the same universe. Again, Hopkins, top 3 or top 5. Cooks, top 10, maybe top 15. In essence, the Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins, the 57th overall pick, and the 131st overall pick for Brandon Cooks, David Johnson, the 40th overall pick, and 2 future fourths. One in 2021 and one in 2022. That's not terrible. I gotta be honest with you. Look, the Cardinals got the best player in that deal. DeAndre Hopkins is better than Brandon Cooks, he's better than David Johnson, and he's better than Randall Cobb. But the Texans added 3 players that when you put them all together, they may be better than Hopkins. And they moved up 17 picks in the second round. Now you want to tell me that the contracts for Cooks and Johnson are ridiculous? That's fine. You're right. David Johnson, massively overpaid. Brandon Cooks, massively overpaid. But Bill O'Brien is banking on these guys having bounce-back seasons. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a huge gamble. It's not one I would make. Bill O'Brien is going to have more heat on him than he's ever had before. He needs David Johnson to look like the second coming of peak Arian Foster, and he needs Brandon Cooks to look like the second coming of, DeAndre Hopkins. I'll tell you, that offense, now with Watson, Johnson, Duke Johnson, Fuller, Stills, Cobb, Cooks, Darren Fells, that's a scary offense. That's an offense that will make the playoffs next year. They have a good defense. There's nothing stopping the Texans from making a big run. Realize something. They came very close to beating the Chiefs last year. If it wasn't for Mahomes' magic, the Texans may be the team that advanced to the Super Bowl. They were better than the Titans. Texans 49ers Super Bowl? I don't know who wins that. Maybe the Texans. I have no idea. You want to tell me that Bill O'Brien could have just kept DeAndre Hopkins and used the 57th overall pick on a wide receiver instead of signing Randall Cobb and trading for Cooks? You're right. You're 100% right there. And that's what I would have done. I'm not defending the decision to trade DeAndre Hopkins. What I'm saying is, I understand the logic. While the Texans gave up a fantastic player, they added 3 players in Cobb, Cooks, and David Johnson that, if you put them together, are better than DeAndre Hopkins. Now, they all have to stay healthy. There's no question. But I really understand the logic. Think about it this way. The Texans have been knocking on the door for a while. They've never been able to get over the hump. They came close last year, but again, Patrick Mahomes happened. This is a team that really, really wants to make a deep playoff run. Not just one playoff victory. Not even 2 playoff victories. They want to win a Super Bowl. What's the best way of doing that? With draft picks or established veterans? The answer is established veterans. Now, ideally, you'd like to have a mix of the two. And again, David Johnson's an injury risk, and Brandon Cooks is too. Not as much of a risk as people are making him out to be, but there is a risk there. But assuming everyone stays healthy, you can't tell me that this isn't the Texans team that can meet the Chiefs in the AFC title game. Again, I don't like the decision to trade DeAndre Hopkins, but I understand the logic. And with this trade, it makes more sense. And you want to tell me that Brandon Cooks and David Johnson are both so overpaid that it's not worth taking on their contracts? You're right. You're 100% right. But, look, if they both played to their potential, it's really not that bad. David Johnson is a former 1,000-yard back, and Brandon Cooks is a former 1,200-yard receiver. Would you pay a 1,000-yard back $11 million? There are some people that wouldn't. There are some people that would. I would. I'd prefer to go a little lower on the contract, but I wouldn't be so opposed to it as to not do it. And Brandon Cooks is due to make $8 million this year. If Brandon Cooks can put up another 1,000-yard season, yeah, I'm giving that guy $8 million. And also, the Texans can cut those 2 guys next year, and all they have as dead cap is David Johnson at $2.1 million. You know, I don't follow the Texans closely enough to tell you what their needs were going into the offseason. But it's clear that Bill O'Brien wanted a better overall skill position core. And while he lost the best player in the 2 big trades that he made in Hopkins, he got back 3 players that, if you combine them, are better than Hopkins. Would you rather have 1 great player or 3 really good ones? I'd actually rather have the 3 really good ones. Look, I know that the Texans needed offensive line help, and you want to tell me you'd rather sign a bunch of offensive linemen like the Jets did? With the cap space that you used to take on David Johnson, Brandon Cooks, and Randall Cobb? That's fine. You can tell me that. I don't know exactly what positions those would be. Again, I don't follow them that closely, but I know that they needed to reinforce the offensive line. That's a fair argument. But the Texans have the draft picks necessary to beef up their offensive line. While they don't have a first, the Dolphins have it. They got that in the Tunsil and Stills trade. The Texans have the 40th overall pick and the 90th overall pick. You can find 2 offensive line starters with those picks. It's easier said than done, but it can be done. I've said this before. I would rather draft offensive linemen than sign them. Offensive line continuity is extremely important. And you take a look at the best offensive lines that we've had recently, the Cowboys drafted all their guys, and the Colts drafted all their guys. My buddy Nick had an interesting point on this trade, and it's one that I did not consider, but it's definitely worth bringing up. The Texans very easily could have had Brandon Cooks and DeAndre Hopkins. It's not like they flipped any assets that they got for Hopkins for Cooks. No, they traded the 57th overall pick, which they already had. DeAndre Hopkins, Brandon Cooks, Kenny Stills, and Will Fuller. That sounds really good to me. The one thing I'll say is maybe O'Brien wouldn't have been motivated to make that trade if he still had Hopkins. I mean, maybe he would have. I certainly would have. I don't think people would be criticizing the trade if they still had Hopkins. Yeah, it's still a gamble to give up the 57th overall pick for Cooks, but if he's hurt, you still have DeAndre Hopkins to throw to. Again, maybe O'Brien wouldn't have made this trade if he still had Hopkins, but it's certainly worth mentioning. Like I said, I didn't think about that. Great job, Nick. I'm looking forward to speaking to you next week. All in all, I really don't mind what the Texans did. It's not what I would have done, but so far, I'd give their overall offseason a B-. I brought up the Chiefs a little earlier, and they made a signing that I want to talk about, and that is them bringing back Bashaud Breeland for 1 year at $4.5 million. I know that they were kind of desperate for cornerback help. As it stands right now, their only corners are Breeland, Charvarius Ward, Rashad Fenton, Alex Brown, and Antonio Hamilton. That's not very good. So I understand the need to bring in another corner, and Breeland has familiarity with the system, and he's young, and he's produced in the league before, early in his career with the Redskins. You know, I sort of kind of understand the logic, but Bashaud Breeland was not good last year. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he had a 48.3 overall grade. And if you watched him in the postseason, yeah, he was really good, but you gotta get there first. The Chiefs are paying him based off of his playoff accomplishments. I don't like when teams do that. You've got a whole season to get through first. I don't like this move. It's a huge overpay, and I hope that the Chiefs invest heavily in their secondary in the draft. I do want to talk about an NHL death that kind of flew under the radar, but it's worth talking about, and that is Pat Stapleton, who died on Wednesday. His death was announced last night, but he died on Wednesday at the age of 79. It's okay if you don't know who Stapleton was. Not a very household name. Unless you're a huge Blackhawks fan, you're probably not going to know who he was, but for a period of time in the late 60s, early 70s, Stapleton was one of the best defensemen in the league. And the irony is, he almost didn't get there in the first place. He came up with the Boston Bruins and played 90 games for him when he was 21 and 22 years old. In those 90 games, he only had 10 points with a minus 69. That's bad for a forward, let alone a defenseman. I mean, that is atrocious. So Stapleton got sent down, and it seemed like he was just going to be a footnote in NHL history. But he didn't give up. I know it sounds cliche, but in the 64-65 season, he was the Western Hockey League's top defenseman. The Blackhawks took notice, and he ended up on the Blackhawks in the 65-66 season. Immediately, he made an impact as he made the first of his 3 All-Star teams and finished third in voting for the Norris Trophy. Scored 34 points in 55 games. And in the playoffs that year, he had 5 points in 6 games. The year after that, tied for the league lead in games played with 70, 34 points. And in 6 playoff games, he had 2 points. Year after that, 38 points in 67 games, and 4 assists in 11 games. The 68-69 season was when Stapleton really took that jump from good to really good, as he had 50 assists, 56 points in 75 games. At the time, that was the record for assists in a season by a defenseman. Now, granted, it only lasted for 1 year because this guy named Bobby Orr broke it literally the season after, but hey, Stapleton held it for a little bit. He still gets credit. After that, he was named captain of the Blackhawks, was a very, very highly respected player, and in the next 3 seasons, he had at least 40 points. And in the playoffs, he was really, really good. In the 70-71 season, when the Blackhawks narrowly lost to the Canadiens in the Stanley Cup Finals, Stapleton had 17 points in 18 games. Year after that, 4 points in 8 games. Year after that, 17 points in 16 games. He led the NHL in assists in those playoffs, 72-73. Which is really saying something because he only had 31 points the whole regular season. He made the All-Star team in the 70-71 and 71-72 seasons. It seemed like he was on his way to great things with the Blackhawks. But then another Chicago hockey team came calling. The Cougars of the WHA made him an offer that he couldn't turn down. They signed him to a 5-year deal and named him player coach. And in the WHA, Stapleton dominated. 58 points in 78 games, made the All-Star team his first year there, and the Murphy Trophy, which was given to the top defenseman of the WHA. And the Cougars were in their version of the Stanley Cup Finals, the Avco Cup Finals, but they lost to the Houston Aeros. And Stapleton kept his good play up in the playoffs. 13 assists in 12 games, along with 36 penalty minutes, which, you know, as a coach is pretty good. I don't know if those were fighting majors or ticky-tacky penalties, but There's something to be said about your coach getting 36 penalty minutes. That's impressive. I like that. Stapleton kept dominating the WHA, never scored less than 34 points, and kept his good play up in the playoffs. But after the 74-75 season, he was traded to the Indianapolis Racers, and he wasn't coach anymore. Again, kept playing well, but he wouldn't coach again until the 78-79 season. He decided to retire after playing a year with the Cincinnati Stingers. He spent 2 years with the Racers, 1 year with the Stingers, and Stapleton was the last coach in Indianapolis Racers history as the team folded midway through the 78-79 season. Pat Stapleton is a very, very underrated player. Was really, really good. One of the best defensemen of his era. And I sincerely hope that he rests in peace. This just came across the wire, I guess is the best way to say it. The XFL is no more. It suspended operations and has laid off its entire workforce. So that's it. The XFL. One and done again. Look, obviously, they probably would have survived if the coronavirus didn't happen. They were doing pretty well with the fans. I know the reception there was positive. I'm not sure how they were doing with TV ratings. I think it was going down each week, but I think it was still respectable. But that's it for the XFL. You're going to hear people say that they may come back in a couple years. No, they laid off their whole workforce. What are they going to do? Bring in thousands of new people? In 2 or 3 years, that's not going to work. No one is going to do that. This is a league that has failed twice. I understand that this time it wasn't their fault, but the simple fact is, I wouldn't want to work for them. When you latch on with a company, the last thing you want to be thinking about is this company gonna shut down? I don't think Lehman Brothers employees thought that. Bear Stearns, Washington Mutual. The XFL was able to convince a lot of people that they were going to succeed this time, but no. I never thought that it was going to work. I watched very few of their games. The longest I ever watched a game of theirs was, I was at a Mexican restaurant with my father. The game just happened to be on, and we were just watching it. But I didn't go out of my way to watch the games. People actually asked me if I wanted to go to XFL games. I said no. No interest in schlepping out to MetLife Stadium for that. I don't even like schlepping out to MetLife Stadium for the Jets. Don't get me wrong, I'll support my team wherever they play, but it's hell to get there. You think I'm going to support the New York Guardians? No football league in this country can survive except the NFL. They have a monopoly on football in this country. It's just that simple. You want to tell me that the networks will pick the league up because there's nothing to do after football and before baseball? Yeah, you can tell me that. But the talent pool is so bad that who really wants to watch those games? Josh Johnson, PJ Walker, and Jordan Ta'amu are not good players. I don't care what they did in the XFL. They're not going to do anything in the NFL. There aren't enough football players to go around. The only way that you could get a spring football league going is if you didn't focus on professionals. You recruited guys straight out of high school and before they become eligible for the NFL draft. And you say to them, hey, listen, here's a professional contract. You're going to be here for X amount of years at this amount of salary. When that contract is up, you'll have tape to show to NFL guys. You'll get your money right away. You won't have to go through the draft. And it'll be better for you than having to go through college. That's the only way that a spring football league can happen. Until then, we're not going to be seeing any successful spring leagues. Alright. You know how I mentioned that I'm going to be talking to Nick next week? Well, here's what's going to happen. On Thursday, the two of us are going to do a 2-person NFL mock draft. We did this last year on WHPC Sports Talk, except it was with 4 people. I had a great time, but I wanted to duplicate that here. Here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to pick first, because this is my show and I do what I want. Nick is going to go second. I'm going to go third. He's going to go fourth, etc., etc., etc. This also isn't who we think the teams are going to pick. This is who we think they should pick. So, if Nick thinks that the Redskins should take Tua Tagovailoa, he will say that the Redskins are picking Tua. Doesn't matter if he thinks they're going to or not. If he thinks that's what they should do, that's what he'll say. We're also not going to do trades. It gets way too complicated. And if the trades don't happen, it makes you look really stupid. So, we're just doing the first round. It's going to be really, really fun. And, like I said, Nick, I'm looking forward to talking to you. A week from today, you're going to hear an interview that I'm going to do with John Pessa, the author of Yogi, A Life Behind the Mask. Should be very fun. Bera, obviously, very interesting guy to talk about, had a great career, and certainly is worthy of the many, many books that have been written about him. But I think this one is better than most of them, if not all of them. Also, the morning of the first round, so April 23rd, at 6 a.m., you're going to get a New York Jets NFL draft preview. So I'm going to go through all of their picks, and I'm going to tell you who I want them to take. Not who I think they will take, who they should take. Obviously, April 24th is going to be dedicated solely to recapping the first round. The Monday after the draft, at 6 a.m., you're going to get a New York Jets draft recap where I grade each pick and give them an overall grade. Those special Jets shows will not replace the Jacob Valk show as you've come to know and love it. Also, assuming there's nothing else to talk about, I may have a semi-recurring segment where I break down each team's draft class. So, obviously, I won't do that for the Jets again, but I'll go Cardinals, Falcons, Ravens, Bills, etc., etc. That's going to be a replacement for the groups of 4 on my NFL Draft Big Board on the trifecta. Hopefully, by the time I finish the Washington Redskins, we'll have sports back. I love doing the trifecta, but I know I speak for everyone when I say that I'd rather have live sporting events back. I hope you have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay inside. With God's love, we will get through this. Until Monday, I am Jacob Valk saying that when Dave Kingman's glove needed to be fixed, they should have called a welder.